West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
This committee report is tonight the single most important committee report in the history of House Congressional Committee reports. That is what we now have in our hands tonight. And that report would not be what it is and would not have the import that it has without the testimony of the star witness to that committee. Today, the January 6th committee released the transcript of the most important testimony the committee received from the committee's most important witness, 26-year-old Cassidy Hutchinson. The committee has found not a shred of evidence to in any way reduce what appears to be the solid credibility of the committee's star witness, Cassidy Hutchinson. And we learned in her full testimony released today that the first lawyer who represented her in dealings with the committee will face disbarment proceedings in Washington, D.C., and will face prosecution for suborning perjury if Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony is believed. Today, that lawyer whose possible criminal conduct was exposed in the release of Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony today issued a written public statement saying that he did nothing wrong, but he is resigning from his Washington law firm because of the release of that testimony today. And we now know that Cassidy Hutchinson got rid of that lawyer and decided to tell the committee the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth because she was inspired by someone who appeared on this program discussing her testimony. In her testimony, Cassidy Hutchinson says that the first lawyer who represented her, Stefan Passantino, who worked in the Trump White House, quote, page 42, Stefan never told me to lie. He specifically told me, I don't want you to perjure yourself, but I don't recall isn't perjury. They don't know what you can and can't recall. On page 36, Cassidy Hutchinson says, I said, but if I do recall something, but not every little detail, Stefan, can I still say I don't recall? And he had said yes. For that one word, yes, Stefan Passantino should be disbarred if that testimony is believed and should be convicted of suborning perjury if that testimony is believed. Cassidy Hutchinson goes on, and I said, but if I do remember things, but not every little detail, and I say I don't recall, wouldn't I be perjuring myself? And Stefan had said something to the effect of, the committee doesn't know what you can and can't recall, so we want to be able to use that as much as we can, unless you really, really remember something very clearly. And that's when you give a short, sweet response. The correct answer to that question, if I do remember things, but not every little detail, and I say I don't recall, wouldn't I be perjuring myself? The correct answer to that question is yes. You would be perjuring yourself. Stefan Passantino lied to his client about that, if Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony is credible. If Cassidy Hutchinson, who had never had a lawyer before in her life, and who could not afford a lawyer, and had been offered this free lawyer from what she calls Trump world, if Cassidy Hutchinson submitted to and remained under the control of that lawyer paid by Donald Trump, she would have delivered the January 6th committee none of the testimony that is now the basis of the committee's criminal referral of a former president of the United States for prosecution by the Justice Department. Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony reveals another point, that standing alone would be enough to get that lawyer disbarred in most jurisdictions in this country. He refused to tell her who was paying him to represent her. Here is how Cassidy Hutchinson describes her very first words with the criminal defense lawyer that Trump world provided her. Page 21. On Monday, February 7th, 2022, I received a call in the afternoon from Stefan Passantino. I had never worked with Stefan. We never really overlapped, and I had never really heard of him. I also know that he worked on the campaign for a bit, though. He had called to let me know that he was my attorney. And it was a brief call. I let him know that, and I was like, I probably should sign an engagement letter. And he said, no, we're not doing that. Don't worry. We have you taken care of. And I said, remember asking him, I don't have to sign an engagement letter? Because that was sort of the first alarm bell in my head that went off, because I wanted something in writing for myself, because I kind of sometimes have a tendency to overthink things, and I had never had to retain an attorney before, but I do know enough to know that you should be signing an engagement letter. So then I had asked him, all right, well, that's perfectly fine. Would you mind telling me where the funding for this is coming from? I want to thank them. I want to thank whoever it is, because I'm just kind of like figuring things out. And he said, if you want to know at the end, we'll let you know. But we're not telling people where the funding is coming from right now. Don't worry, we're taking care of you. Like, you're never going to get a bill for this. So if that's what you're worried about, I was like, okay, that's what I was worried about. Wasn't the only thing I was worried about. Stefan Passantino will be disbarred in Washington, D.C. if that testimony is proven true. He refused to tell his client who was paying for his client's legal representation. He will be disbarred for that if that is proven true. This testimony, released today, was strong enough to knock that lawyer out of his law firm today. And that is not the final price Stefan Passantino is likely to pay for the unethical and illegal conduct that is described under oath by Cassidy Hutchinson in this transcript. Cassidy Hutchinson did not want a lawyer from Trump world. Page 32. I knew the moment that I went back and had to get a Trump world attorney, I don't like to categorize the Trump world in this way, but in a lot of scenarios that I have been privy to, once you are looped in, especially financially with them, there sort of is no turning back. But Cassidy Hutchinson found herself completely unable to pay for a lawyer. She asked family members for financial help. Her mother was surprised that Cassidy Hutchinson wasn't happy about using a free lawyer from Trump world. Cassidy Hutchinson explained the problem to her mother. Page 32. I was like, no, I am completely indebted to these people. And I was like, and they will ruin my life, Mom, if I do anything that they don't want me to do. Now to page 33, and I read this passage of deeply personal testimony only to make clear the level of desperation Cassidy Hutchinson reached that made turning to a free lawyer from Trump world made her do that. Quote, I don't have a relationship with my biological father, but I went to his house one night. I drove up to New Jersey and I went to his house one night and begged him. It's probably the one thing I regret in all of this. I wish I didn't stoop to that level because it was a no. But I begged him to help me. I said I would pay him back, like name your interest rate, like I just need help. And I remember saying to him, you have no idea what they're going to do to me if I have to get an attorney with Trump world. Because he's a very big Trump supporter, as is his own right. And it's not me being critical, it's just a fact. And he just didn't get it. And I didn't expect him to. But I just left there feeling defeated. And that's why she turned to a Trump world lawyer who lied to her, according to her testimony. A Trump world lawyer who lied to her about perjury and urged her to commit perjury, in effect, according to her testimony. 49 years ago, there was another star witness in Washington who testified under oath on television, like Cassidy Hutchinson, against a Republican president who he served in the White House. That happened 22 years before Cassidy Hutchinson was born. And in her darkest hour, that star witness's testimony against the president he served, a Republican president, became her guiding light. Page 80. So as I'm driving up to Jersey, it's like super early in the morning at this point, I start Googling Watergate. Like, there has to be somebody that participated in Watergate that either had a similar job to me and had exposure. Like, how did they handle this? I had heard John Dean's name before, but then I come across this name, Alex Butterfield, I was on the Wikipedia page and it looked like he had a similar role and title to what I had in the White House. So I'm in driving, sort of trying to read about him, and I found that he, a couple of years ago, worked on this book with Bob Woodward, and this is like the most comprehensive piece of work that he had done since he had testified to the Watergate committee at that time, about 40 years ago. So I ordered 2 copies of this, had them shipped to my parents' house, and I sat there that weekend and read it. And I read it 3 times. I read it once, then I read it again, underlined, and then I read it a 3rd time. I went through and tabbed it, and it was after I read all of this, where he had talked about like how he fought the moral struggle, where he felt like he still had to be loyal to the Nixon White House, but he talked a lot of the same things that I felt like I was experiencing. And it wasn't an identical situation, but it's the emphasis he placed on the moral questions that he was asking himself resonated with me. And then, he ended up testifying to the Watergate committee. And I wasn't by no means trying to compare what I knew to what Butterfield knew at all, but he was somebody that I found and was looking at as somebody who did know things and who was loyal and had a position that required an incredible amount of trust and confidence, but he ended up doing the right thing. And it was after I read this, I was like, if I'm going to pass the merit test for the rest of my life, I need to try to fix some of this. Here is the testimony that Alexander Butterfield gave under oath about the president he served, testimony that ended that presidency.
Mr. Butterfield, are you aware of the installation of any listening devices in the Oval Office of the President?
I was aware of listening devices. Yes, sir.
Mr. Butterfield, as far as you know from your own personal knowledge, from 1970 then until the present time, all of the President's conversations in the offices mentioned and on the telephones mentioned were recorded. As far as you know.
That's correct.
And as far as you know, those tapes are still available.
As far as I know, but I've been away for 4 months, sir.
I have no further questions.
After Cassidy Hutchinson publicly testified to the January 6th committee this summer, I asked Alexander Butterfield to join us on this program with his reaction to the testimony from Washington's newest star witness.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned her, because I can't tell you, Lawrence, I was very impressed by that young lady. You could tell that she didn't particularly want to be there, but she was so professional. You knew that she was being truthful, and it was just I knew nothing about her before, but she was being very professional in every way. I only hope that that my various interviews were half as good.
Did you have the feeling watching her of what it felt like to be in that room yourself, giving that what was then called, the bombshell testimony?
Yeah, yes, I did. I felt I had a feel for what she was going through at the time.
After that, Amy Schuster, a senior producer on this program, was contacted by someone close to Cassidy Hutchinson saying, "We saw Mr. O'Donnell's interview with Alex Butterfield. Ms. Hutchinson would very much like to speak with him, since his testimony in the Nixon matter actually was an inspiration to her." They requested Alexander Butterfield's contact information. Alexander Butterfield then met with Cassidy Hutchinson over Zoom. Alexander Butterfield told us today, quote, "She asked me how my life changed after I testified. I remember telling her how she came through so wonderfully, so beautifully in her testimony. Everybody had to be proud of her, and it was clear how she spoke that she was truthful. I am sure when Alexander Butterfield testified 49 years ago, he wasn't thinking, maybe someday there would be a 26-year-old assistant to the White House Chief of Staff who will find inspiration in that testimony, that choice, Alexander Butterfield's choice to, as Cassidy Hutchinson put it, do the right thing." But now we know that it is possible that years from now, maybe 50 years from now, someone working in a corrupt White House will be inspired by Cassidy Hutchinson to break loose from the grip of that corruption and do the right thing.
It is Friday, the 23rd of December of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Yes, it's the eve of Christmas Eve, because it's the night before Christmas. I think that's how it works. Yeah, how are you doing? Are you staying warm? I hear there's an icy blast that we've only seen in the day after tomorrow, where the world pretty much went into an ice age in about 15 minutes. That's how fast it can go, so we better be careful. All right. Like to have a little bit of advance warning on that, wouldn't you? Well, we have. Let's see. It's been since the 70s, at least, that we've had pretty much a warning. Earth Day was all about that. It wasn't just about picking up the trash along the beach. Yeah, it was to save the planet. And little did we know, the planet will survive. We won't. We might take a few other species with us, too. Because that's what people do when they're on a suicide mission, apparently. Okay, well, the Earth has a way of shaking all that vermin off. They've done it before. They? Well, I don't know. Maybe the Earth is a they. Seems like an organism that lives as a beneficent organism to others, and therefore, when you're beneficent, that's survival, baby. Yeah, it's not competition, it's those beneficent organisms. are the ones that survive and thrive. Okay, welcome to my world. It's called a romance. And you can take that what you want. Okay, it is almost Christmas time, and it is already Hanukkah. So happy holidays to all of those out there. And there's much more holidays around the world happening at the same time. Isn't that weird? It's almost seasonal. But yes, indeed, happy holidays to all. Peace on earth. It'd be nice to have that for once, because when have we ever? It's a nice prayer, I like to say. We might as well pray for peace. And we have prayers for peace, and we pray them all the time, don't we? And then there's others who say, oh, you're just a loser. You don't want to be able to just put your jackboot on the throat of some unfortunate that happens to be in your way. And you go, no. And they think you're just a hippie then. Well, I'm not just a hippie. I'm a punk. Okay. Punks don't like to put their jackboots, which are really Doc Martens in this case, on the throats of those unfortunate. I think tip that little class thing around and maybe we might be getting somewhere. That's right. All right. Okay. I still remember being in Gorky's when a bunch of us kicked some Nazi skinheads that came in doing their little stiff arm salute. Yeah, you don't do that around people who, kick back. And that's what punks are. So that's why I'm not just a hippie. I'm also a punk. And that's their mistake. Because fascism cannot last when that happens. And that's why they kind of want to eradicate the world of it. Let me say something real quick because I wanted to have that, extra long clip by Lawrence there. Not only because of the holidays, but hey, it's a good excuse, isn't it? It's the holidays. Put up a long clip. But also, it is history. I would think that we would all concur. Because in our lifetimes, Watergate was probably the seminal moment of government in our lives and how it can work. And I would say that the January 6th committee report might be elevated into those lofty climbs as well. So it's history in the making. And this young woman, Cassidy Hutchinson, who, she had a lot of stuff going against her. Apparently born into a maggot family, at least her biological dad, she didn't, rightfully so, apparently. She didn't have much contact with. But it sounds like her mom was kind of a maggot. Or at least, I don't know, going along with the crowd. A good Republican, in the vein of the good German. I'm not a Nazi. I just turn my a blind eye to everything they do. Because look at the prosperity we have now. Oh, yeah, great prosperity. So she had some, strikes going against her. And one wonders, why would you get involved with Trump? Well, she was 26 when she was given testimony. So she'd been working her way up through, her path, her chosen path. And working in the office of the White House and the president, that's a dream. That's a childhood dream come true, probably. But when you're in a den of thieves and you don't realize you're in a den of thieves until you're in a den of thieves, it might give you a moral dilemma if you have a conscience, and apparently she does. Cassidy Hutchinson did the right thing. Butterfield did the right thing. John Dean did the right thing. And dare I say, even Daniel Ellsberg did the right thing, even though I don't agree with them on the Snowden and the WikiLeaks guy, Assange. It'll come to me. But anyway, we should get into what we have curated for you, so we won't go through the whole big rigmarole that we usually go through, which we already have. Look at the time! What do we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe for the rest of this, Christmas Eve? After spending $95 million to own the Libs, outgoing Arizona Governor Doug Ducey is backing down and removing that shipping container wall along the Mexican border. A federal judge questioned San Francisco's tactics in its homeless sweeps. They do that, And turning what had been a long-standing post-Watergate norm into established federal policy, the House passed a bill that would require audits of any president's income tax filings. Well, yeah, when you're breaking norms, now's the time to codify it and make it into policy. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Russia's Wagner group received arms from North Korea to bolster its forces in Ukraine. And an employee of Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service has been arrested on suspicion of treason for passing secret information to Russia. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page from that chat room link to the left of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, down near the bottom there is the link to our Patreon page. And please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. I won't go through the whole rigmarole, but if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would really help us. So thank you to those of you who have. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, such as it is, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, such as it is, at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes 10 minutes before showtime, and that is where the real reportage is. So you can find those by following my timelines on whatever platform I happen to be on. The links to those diaries are pretty well readily available. And you can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And most importantly, do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. All right. Deezer. There's still Deezer. You can get podcasts from Deezer. Okay, happy holidays to you once again. It feels like a holiday already. We're in the holiday time. I like it, I guess. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy's Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life, is by the holiday staff at the Associated Press. Arizona will take down a makeshift wall made of shipping containers at the Mexico border, settling a lawsuit and political tussle with the U.S. government over trespassing on federal lands. Well, it worked for the Bundys, okay? And look what happened to them. Nothing. Well, slap on the wrist. The Biden administration and the Republican governor entered into an agreement that Arizona will cease installing the containers in the Coronado National Forest, the only national forest along the border, according to court documents filed on Wednesday in the U.S. District Court in Phoenix. The agreement also calls for Arizona to remove the containers that were already installed in the remote San Rafael Valley in the southeastern Cochise County and in the Yuma area, where the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has an easement on the Cocopah Indian Tribes Reservation. All this must be done by January 4th without damaging any natural resources. Well, none that have already been damaged, I guess. State agencies will consult with the U.S. Forest Service representatives. Governor Doug Ducey has long maintained that the shipping containers were a temporary fixture. Even before the lawsuit, he wanted the federal government to say when it would fill any remaining gaps in the permanent border wall, as it announced it would a year ago. The resolution comes 2 weeks before Democratic. I got to tell the holiday staff of the AP, it's not Democratic. Katie Hobbs, who opposes the construction, takes over as governor. The federal government filed a lawsuit last week against Ducey's administration on behalf of the Bureau of Reclamation, the Department of Agriculture, and the Forest Service. The federal government owes it to Arizonans and all Americans to release a timeline, Ducey wrote last week, responding to news of the federal lawsuit. The work of placing up to 3,000 containers at a cost of $95 million was about a third complete. $95 million and only a third complete. I think somebody was taking a little bit of a, I don't know, what do they call it, skimming? Yeah. But protesters, concerned about its impact on the environment, held up work in recent days. Of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A judge in federal court yesterday, Thursday, questioned San Francisco's tactics in homeless encampment cleanups, suggesting the city is not following its own policies of offering shelter beds to people being asked to leave a public area. Magistrate Judge Donna M. Ryu in U.S. District Court in Oakland did not issue a ruling on a request by homeless plaintiffs to make the city stop dismantling encampments until it has thousands more shelter beds. She said she would issue a written order on the request for a preliminary injunction. Attorneys for San Francisco said its policies balance the rights of homeless people with a need to maintain public spaces clean and safe for everyone. In court documents, they said homeless people get plenty of notice of upcoming cleanings, receive offers of help and shelter, and are asked to leave an encampment only after declining an offer to stay elsewhere. But the judge pointed to evidence provided by the Coalition on Homelessness and 7 plaintiffs, containing academic analysis and detailed eyewitness accounts of numerous sweeps conducted in the past 3 years that show homeless people were deprived of personal items and pushed out with nowhere to go. The policy is not the problem, Ryu said in the virtual hearing. The question is, how is that policy being executed? The Coalition on Homelessness sued San Francisco in September, alleging that the city clears out encampments not to connect homeless people to services and housing as it claims, but in response to neighborhood complaints and to drive out homeless residents. The lawsuit is among several pending in western states, where visible homelessness has grown amid a shortage of shelter beds and affordable housing. Mascaro of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. The House took action yesterday, Thursday, after disclosures that the IRS never fully reviewed Trump's tax returns during his presidency, passing a bill that would require audits of any president's income tax filings. The legislation would turn what had been a long-standing post-Watergate norm into established federal policy. The They keep doing this. It's democratic. I have to do these edits on the fly. I apologize. The News Radio Style Manual stimulates democratic as well as everybody else. So please, writers, reporters, democratic. Let me begin again. The Democratic-led measure provides a capstone to a years-long investigation of Trump's tenure as the first president in recent history not to disclose his tax returns to the public. The legislature faced staunch opposition from Republicans and has little chance of becoming law in the final days of this Congress, but it is seen as a starting point for future efforts to bolster oversight of the presidency. These improved guardrails will provide Americans the assurance they deserve that our tax code applies evenly and fairly to all of us, no matter how powerful, said Democratic Representative Richard Neal of Massachusetts, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee that led the effort. The vote was approved 222 to 201, mostly along party lines. The committee's top Republican, Representative Kevin Brady of Texas, said the bill would infringe on taxpayer privacy. He said the unprecedented action jeopardizes the rights of every American to be protected from political targeting. What does that really mean, Mr. Brady? Every American? No, only the ones that are, crooks like you guys. The committee's lengthy investigation revealed this week that the IRS had failed to pursue audits of Trump on a timely basis during his presidency, as required under the tax agency's protocol. Only when Democrats formally questioned the IRS on April 19th of 2019 did the IRS begin its first review 2 years into Trump's tenure, and we still don't have that audit. Later this week, the committee is expected to release Trump's returns after a protracted legal battle with the former president. The wealthy businessman declined to fully explain his finances during his 2016 campaign, and while in the White House, it would be the first formal release of his financial situation from his time in office. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, good for dieting. As we know, growing up's not easy. However, growing up while having an uncontrollable desire to devour human flesh is arguably even harder, which is basically the storyline in director Luca Guadagnino's latest. Set in the late 80s, Bones and All tells the story of Marin, Taylor Russell, who finds herself on her own after her only parent abandons her shortly after her 18th birthday. As we learn from a tape he leaves her by way of explanation, her father learned about her cravings at a young age and hoped in vain that she'd grow out of it. Armed only with her birth certificate, Marin is determined to track down her long-estranged mother, whom she suspects may suffer from the same affliction. On the way from Virginia to Minnesota to meet her, she encounters two other cannibals, the creepy Sully, played to a T by Mark Rylance at his best, and Lee, a troubled young man who becomes her boyfriend. As Marin learns, cannibals vary in their approach to sating their hunger. Sully claims he only feasts on the dead or dying, whereas Lee, played by Timothy Chalamet, feeds randomly. However, the one thing they all share is that they and most of their victims live on the fringes of society, which would condemn their actions if they were noticed. With this in mind, it's easy to see their cannibalism as a metaphor for marginalization, and why the film is set in Reagan's America, a time of homophobia, AIDS, and a culture where appearances of normality matter more than individual happiness. Superimpose the coming-of-age story, and it's easy to see why some have dubbed this one as an alternative Romeo and Juliet. Some additional character development could have helped, and maybe some editing of the gore, but bones and all is nonetheless a hearty and original tale. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hello, 60-Second Science fans. This is Jeff Del Vizio. I'm the executive producer of the podcast. First, I really just want to thank you for all being loyal listeners for however long you've been listening. And just in case that's from the very start, you've been with us now for 16 years, 3 months, and 7 days, counting today. That's near prehistoric in podcast years. In that time, we've published well over 3,000 episodes on every imaginable science and health topic. But on September 5th, 2006, we started it all off with Beatles. Karen Hopkin, who's been with us the whole way, honestly, she really has. She just did a segment last week on how your female pooch is definitely judging you. Described how MIT researchers were making water-saving materials based off the nature tech built into the Namib desert beetle. Here, for nostalgia's sake, is that segment in full.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. This'll just take a minute. Biologist J.B.S. Haldane once said that the creator, if he exists, has an inordinate fondness of beetles. Well, so do researchers at MIT. Inspired by the Namib desert beetle, MIT engineers Robert Cohn and Michael Rubner have produced a new material that can trap and control tiny volumes of water. The Namib Desert in southern Africa is one of the driest spots on Earth. Its inhabitants survive by extracting precious moisture from the light morning fog that periodically sweeps across the desert sands. The beetle's wings are studded with hydrophilic bumps that collect water droplets and hydrophobic channels that funnel the droplets into the bug's mouth. The MIT scientists used a similar design for their beetle-mimicking material, described in an online version of the journal Nano Letters. Such materials could be used to help move small liquid samples around a lab on a chip, or to make tents that could provide shelter and a cool drink to people who camp in the desert. The water harvesting material might not represent intelligent design, but it's sure a good example of intelligent imitation. Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
Fascinating, and actually 60 seconds long, which really is why I'm here talking to you all today. The podcast that you've loved and listened to for so long is getting a major update. We're going to start with changing the name to reflect reality. We're really into reality around here. The show hasn't been just a minute for a long time, so we're going to stop saying that it is. But the show itself isn't going anywhere. Exactly the opposite. In the new year, we'll be back with a fresh new name and look. We'll be publishing more often, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to start. And we'll take you on sonic journeys that still respect your time, so they'll be quick, but we'll also expand the breadth of what we cover. It's going to be really fascinating and fun, and we want you all there for the ride. While we prep for the big relaunch, we're going to take an extended holiday break. Plus a little bit. But don't worry, we'll be back in your podcast feed in early 2023 with new, exciting shows that dive into fascinating science and still leave you in wonder, but with plenty of time left in your day for everything else. We'll see you all then, and thanks. For the show now formerly known as 60-Second Science, I'm Jeff Del Vizio.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
This is an important message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. When it snows this winter, make sure you clear more than your driveway. Before you hit the road and before you get in the driver's seat, check to be sure that your vehicle's tailpipe is clear of snow. If the tailpipe is blocked, carbon monoxide, an odorless, colorless, and deadly gas produced by your engine can build up quickly inside your vehicle, poisoning anyone inside. To learn more, call 1-800-CDC-INFO. That's 1-800-232-4636.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I'm dreaming of a white, non-sectarian, non-denominational, non-government-sponsored late December holiday. Hey, honey, come quick. It's the ACLU Carolers.
I'm singer-songwriter Patty Larkin, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
'Tis the season, the silly season, the time of year when some claim that the ACLU is against Christmas because we and other groups that believe in religious freedom fight to maintain the First Amendment guarantee of a wall of separation between church and state. Separation of church and state has meant that religious symbols, including a creche, that's a structure depicting baby Jesus in the manger, can be displayed on private property, but that public property is reserved for all the people and not one specific religion. It's the First Amendment's Establishment Clause that has prohibited the government from endorsing, favoring, supporting, or trying to establish a national religion. Sadly, in 2022, the Supreme Court gave a gut punch to the Establishment Clause, holding that a high school football coach right after the game could conduct his Christian prayer service on the 50-yard line, which of course looked like a school-sponsored, that is government-sponsored, religious service, with some students feeling compelled to participate. Fortunately, most people still believe in separation of church and state, and the right to sing and listen to "May Your Days Be Merry and Bright," or not.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1908. That was the day that 3 labor leaders of the American Federation of Labor, Samuel Gompers, John Mitchell, and Frank Morrison, were sentenced to jail terms for calling for a boycott against the Buck's Stove and Range Company. Buck's was headquartered in St. Louis. The company was notorious for being anti-union. The company's president, James Van Cleve, was president of the National Association of Manufacturers, which fought unions at every turn. In 1907, Van Cleve increased the workday from 9 to 10 hours for some of the Buck's workers. The workers went out on strike. In response, the AFL put Buck's on their "We Do Not Patronize" list. For that, the company asked the federal courts to intervene. Buck's argued that the boycott violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. The court issued an injunction. The AFL was told not to communicate about a boycott of Buck's. They were not even allowed to criticize the company in any way. The AFL leaders were also convicted and given prison terms. The AFL appealed, and the case languished through the court system until 1914. In the end, the U.S. Supreme Court dismissed the charges. Because so much time had gone by, it was past the statute of limitations. But the court did not answer the fundamental question of whether the boycott was legal in the first place. The long, expensive legal battle was a drain on the AFL's finances. Boycotts are an important tool for working people to register protest. Labor has long argued that the right to boycott is protected by the First Amendment's right to free speech. It's not surprising, however, that company owners will do anything they can to limit the power of workers. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 44 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of around 50. What the hell? Yeah, we're going to have slightly warmer days, relatively, and slightly warmer nights for the next week. Currently under foggy and drizzly conditions at the moment, and we will be overcast throughout the day. Winds light and variable, mostly cloudy. Oh, and looks like, rain is going to be lessening. Mostly cloudy skies early tonight, then partly cloudy after midnight. Lows in the low 40s, winds light and variable. And then cloudy with rain developing tomorrow about midday. Highs in the low 50s, winds light and variable. And this light rain should bring us, looks like almost a quarter inch of rain. And then lightening up a bit on Sunday, and then looks like we'll be bumping around an inch or more on Boxing Day. Wow. Okay. Pollen is rated as none right outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 37 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.13 inches. Visibility is at 1 mile, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 53 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 57 and partly cloudy. Rome is 60 degrees and fair. Kyiv is 35 and partly cloudy. Kabul is 31 and clear. Hong Kong is 56 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 38 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 66 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 47 degrees and cloudy. And New York, New York is 48 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Amir Madhani and Edith M. Lederer of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. The White House said yesterday, Thursday, that the Wagner Group, a private Russian military company, has taken delivery of an arms shipment from North Korea to help bolster its forces as it fights side by side with Russian troops in Ukraine. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said U.S. intelligence officials determined that North Korea completed an initial arms shipment that included rockets and missiles last month. We assess that the amount of material delivered to Wagner will not change battlefield dynamics in Ukraine, Kirby said, but we are certainly concerned that North Korea is planning to deliver more military equipment. North Korea today again flatly denied it has shipped munitions to Russia, calling the U.S. accusations of arms transfer to Russia the groundless theory cooked up by some dishonest forces. The White House has expressed alarm about Wagner's growing involvement in the war, as it has been particularly active in the eastern Donbas region. Kirby said in certain instances, Russian military officials have even been subordinate to Wagner's command. Biden administration officials said with the arms sales to the private military group, North Korea is violating UN sanctions that bans them from importing or exporting weapons. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the U.S. envoy to the United Nations, called it despicable that Russia, a permanent veto-wielding member of the UN Security Council, which imposed the sanctions, is now using weapons procured from North Korea and Iran to pursue its war of aggression against Ukraine. An unidentified spokesman at the North Korean Foreign Ministry said in a statement carried by state media that the nation, quote, remains unchanged in its principled stand on the issue of arms transactions between North Korea and Russia, which has never happened, end quote. The spokesman did not mention the U.S. assessment that North Korea sent an arms shipment to the Wagner Group, but he accused the U.S. of criminal acts of bringing bloodshed and destruction to Ukraine by providing it with a large amount of weapons while repeating its own support of Russia in the war.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Gear Molson from the AP brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. An employee of Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service has been arrested on suspicion of treason for passing secret information to Russia, prosecutors said yesterday, Thursday. The man, a German citizen who was identified only as Karsten L., in line with German privacy rules, was arrested in Berlin on Wednesday, federal prosecutors said in a statement. The apartment and workplace of the employee of the Federal Intelligence Service, or BND, and another person were searched, prosecutors said. They gave no details on the second person. They said the BND employee passed this year information that he had acquired in his professional activity to a Russian intelligence service, which they did not identify. They added that the information was a state secret as identified by Germany's criminal code, but did not elaborate. The suspect was brought before a judge yesterday, Thursday, who ordered him held in custody pending a possible indictment. The investigation was being conducted in close cooperation with the BND, prosecutors said. The head of the agency, Bruno Kahl, said the intelligence service brought in prosecutors immediately after internal investigations substantiated information about a possible case of treason. He said there were searches at 2 BNB properties. Well, as that story develops, we're going to get out of here for the holidays. But you do know that Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday, Boxing Day. River City Hash Boxing Day Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night and all holiday weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here on Monday on Boxing Day, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.